So our third guest in this digital information about European organizations and networks that Innlandet is member of is Euromontana. So we are very happy to have Director Guillaume Corradino with us today. Welcome. We look forward to your presentation of Euromontana for the Innlandet County Council and as well our colleagues in the administration. So please, Guillaume, the stage is yours.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. I'm very happy to be here on behalf of Euromontana, the European Association of Mountain Areas. And I will take you through the activities that we do, focusing on how we can work with the county on every single pillar of action that we have. Starting with a little table of content, I will start by introducing who we are, what is the vision that we have for European mountains, and then we will go a little bit more in the details of how we work in practice with examples, with objectives, and with always a summary of how you as a member could take advantage of our network. So starting with the basics, what is Euromontana? So we are a non-profit pan-European multi-sectoral association for cooperation in mountains. So that is a mouthful, but essentially there are three elements here. So first is non-profit, that's important. The second is pan-European, so we represent the interest of the continental mountains, not the European Union specifically, and that's why we are very happy to have Norwegian members, but also Swiss members, and we also used to have British members in the network. The second element is multi-sectoral. That means that unlike many associations based in Brussels, we have a diversity of profiles. We do not only have public authorities like the Innlandet County, we also have farmers associations, researchers, training institutes, and chambers of commerce and chambers of agriculture. So the reason for this diversity is to be a sort of already a common voice of mountain stakeholders and not represent a specific interest, whether economically or geographically. So this diversity is really what makes us special here in Brussels, and it is very precious to us. Now, maybe to give you a bit more details on the types of members we have, I arbitrarily decided to show examples from 4 countries. Obviously, you can see Norway here, where we have Innlandet County Council, but we also have Buskerud, we have the Eastern Norway Research Institute, and the Westland County Council as members. And you see the profile of our members in France is very different. We have a agriculture school called ISARA. We have the FNSEA, which is the main national trade union for farmers. We have one very large region, Auvergne-Rhône-Alpes, and then we have a natural park and a value chain association dedicated to the pork value chain in mountains. So as you can see, depending on the country, we have quite different profiles and therefore interests for members. So Norway is closer to what we have in Spain, where most of our members are public authorities. So it's just important to know that we don't have the same diversity in every country, but altogether, we do have a very diverse network. Very quickly, a little bit of history without going in the details. It is just to show that the idea of Euromontana is very old. It started as a working group in the FAO in the 70s, already called Euromontana. And at the time, it was meant to bring together stakeholders from the Alps and the Pyrenees and work mostly on agriculture in mountain areas. And of course, now, as you will see later, we have evolved a little bit on our focus and scope. And just to take you to the actual founding of our association, it was in 96. And this is where we have become a legal entity. And the only thing I want to point out here is that in our statutes, the object of the association is to improve the living conditions of the mountain populations of Europe. It is very important for us, again, that we do not represent mountains as an object or agriculture as a sector. We represent the communities. It is at the heart of everything we do, and it is very important for us to emphasize this. Now, a little bit about what is our governance structure. Essentially, we have, of course, like many network, a general assembly, and then we are governed mostly by a board of directors. You can see on this slide our current president, our first women president, Laura Gascon Herrero, who is on a normal job working for the province of Teruel in Spain, but she has been a long-standing member of Euromontana, so she knows us very well. And we have 3 vice presidents who are a bit more engaged in our strategic decision than the rest. And they represent the agriculture sector mostly, but also a local authority in Spain. How do we make all of that work on the day-to-day? Because of course our board members have actual jobs. We have a team of 5 full-time employees here. I am one of them in Brussels. This is a team here. We have more or less half of the resources of the staff focused on running European projects. And the other half is more traditional functions like policy, communication, and on my side, a little bit of everything as a director. Now, moving on to the content, what is our vision for mountains? So first of all, obviously, the first thing we do is to clarify that mountains are not a single entity with a single challenge or even an homogeneous type of challenge. We always underline the difference and the diversity between mountain territories. Obviously, if we look at the Alps that have been over developed in terms of tourism, for example, they are highly populated. Some areas are not suffering depopulation so much. This is very different from mid-sized mountains in the south of Spain, where the issues are very, very, very different. And therefore, our work is not the same whenever we address one challenge or the other. The second part of our narrative is always to put forward a number of key statistics and figures when it comes to Europe and its mountains. Mountains in Europe represent 36% of the surface of the continent. Again, I am not talking about the EU, I'm talking about Europe in general. And mountains represent 17% of the population. 18% of the agricultural holdings, and about 15% of the, in that case, European endemic species. So just these facts show what is required for mountain. And it means we have to find ways to maintain a very large surface of comprising natural resources, but also agriculture areas, tourism areas, where actually a minority of the population lives. So that means we need to make sure that these 70% do not become 15, 12, 10, 5% of the population. We need to maintain the population, the communities. We need to make sure they have the means to live well, so that they can also continue to maintain the 36% of surface of the continent. That is very important. And that requires differentiated policies at national, regional, but obviously European level as well. Now that means we have to work on a lot of different areas, and it is not to worry you here. We are only 5 in the office, as I said before, but on our table we have a lot of sectors to work with. We have to work with youth and education. We have to work with forestry, with digital innovation, rural development, research, etc., etc. Obviously, in the case of mountain, they're all very interconnected, so we never really work on one at the same time. And the way we focus our effort is based on the strategy guidelines that we receive from our board. For example, currently, the strategic priorities for us are territorial cohesion, agriculture policy, demographic change, and climate adaptation. So with this in mind, this is how we focus our efforts. Now, we have 4 pillars of action, and I will go through each of them, but it is important for me to underline that historically our mission is focused on the first 2 pillars that you see on the screen, which is on the one hand influence and advocacy, and on the second hand collaboration and knowledge exchange. These are the 2 main missions. The other 2, collaboration for projects and doing our own research and studies, they are supporting pillars. We need them to do a better job at influencing and at collaborating. Starting with the first one, which is influence and advocacy. So this is the most obvious reason why we have an office in Brussels. It is to be close to the European institution. And as I said, we have a few reasons for this pillar of action. So first one is, of course, the need to defend the specificities of mountain in several policies, even in research policies, even in education policy, and more obviously in agriculture and territorial development policies. So this is our job to make sure that we raise the little flag, we raise awareness about the specificities and needs of mountains, and we we get engaged in policy discussion whenever it is needed. The second need that we have for advocacy and influence is to disseminate knowledge between different stakeholders, including between the European level and the regional level stakeholders. And engaging with other networks, whether it is the Association of Border Regions or the Association of Regions with Product of Origin, which is more focused on food. It is our job also to find allies and use networks and work collaboratively with the others. It is not possible for mountains to work in a silo. We have a diversity of profiles in our network and we use it to also engage with a diversity of stakeholders here in Brussels. Now, of course, how we do that, we have a few ways that are not particularly innovative. They are quite standard. The first way is to engage with European institutions actively by taking part in expert groups, stakeholder discussions. And to be honest with you, we have been around for 30 years. So the European institution come to us to participate in such discussion. It happens that we also have to knock on the door and insist that we are part of the discussion, but in many cases, whether it is on agriculture or territorial development, we are already a well-established and recognized player, and therefore we are very busy attending a number of meetings where we can interact directly with the European Commission. We also, besides the European Commission, we also take part in organization at macro-regional and international level. It is important. It is part of the advocacy work. And as I said, we need to engage with other rural networks to join forces. I will maybe quickly go through the more what do we do with the members when it comes to advocacy and influence. So obviously we do replies to public consultation. We submit recommendation for policy change, and we do that collectively with our members. Usually the secretariat will draft something and then discuss it and validate it with our members. In addition, we of course do, like many organizations, a legislative monitoring, which then can be shared with our members through our newsletter. And we produce a large number of policy papers of various importance and formats that can go from a letter to a commissioner or to a public declaration or position paper, depending on the context. I have a few more details on the networks that we work with, but I will not go through all of that now. What I want to underline are two of them. Among the networks and entities we work with, I want to underline that we have co-created a so-called Alliance for European Mountains, which is an informal group of policymakers from the European Parliament and the European Committee of the Regions that originate from mountain areas. So it is a sort of intergroup that is not formally funded by the institutions, but that is supported by us directly as a secretariat, and that allow us to reach to a community of European policymakers directly inside the institution. So this is quite recent. It is from this year, and we are working really hard to disseminate it. The other network that you will see on this slides are more related to the stakeholder group that I've mentioned. And another one I want to mention are the international involvement that we have, so beyond the European Union. We are a steering committee member of the Mountain Partnership, which is an initiative of the FAO, where we follow and engage with our other organizations from around the world involved in mountain research and mountain development. And more focus on the moment now. We are member of the steering committee for Europe for the International Year of Pastoralism that is going to take place in 2026 around the world. We are an active member of that, and you will see later that we are organizing a major event on the topic of pastoralism in the coming months. Some examples of positioning and advocacy work, just to illustrate a little bit more what we defend and how we do it. So if I take the example of rural development, for example, our focus is to combat depopulation by promoting better living conditions for mountain communities and improving the attractiveness of mountain areas. Obviously, this is very much connected to the challenge of demographic change that I mentioned before, because we need to work in the same direction. On mountain economies in general, what we defend very strongly is a need to diversify our economic sectors. We should not rely too much on agriculture and tourism, because this lacks resilience in case of shocks. As we can all remember from the pandemic of the COVID, when tourism fell down, a number of areas relying on tourism had a lot of difficulties. So it is important for resilience and long-term development that we look outside of these two flagship sectors. Some examples of activities, again, to illustrate a little bit more. I mentioned before that we produced quite a lot of position papers. In the last year, we have done so on the areas of water resilience, reduction of brain drain in rural areas, on generational renewal, on the next budget of the European Union, and obviously on the EU Common Agriculture Policy. This is what has really taken a lot of our time in the last few months. Also, quite recently, we have celebrated our 30 years anniversary, and you can see here the image of the so-called New Krakow Declaration, which is a renewal of the original declaration from 30 years ago that led to the creation of Euromontana. And we use this declaration to remind that many of the challenges that existed 30 years ago in relation to mountains, unfortunately, are still there. There has been some progress, but we still have a long way to go. And this declaration is a very powerful political instrument for us, because we will use it to continue pushing for a lot of demands when it comes to differentiating policies for mountains sectors, whether it is tourism or agriculture or demographics. Now, to sum up this part on influence, how do we work with our members? So first of all, as I said, we inform the members on political development. So if you're part of our network, you should receive a newsletter with key highlights on political development. We also inform the members by producing detailed policy brief to explain exactly what a new piece of legislation on the table on the EU level means for mountain and what is our position. So we do that exclusively for members. We consult with the members on every position we take. So it is very important that members are active and do not hesitate ever to share their views on a problem. We work by consensus. So it is never going to be majority wins ideas on our side. It is always going to be a consensus. And what we present to the world reflects this consensus that we have internally. So we co-develop positions. As I said, it is not just about validating and agreeing with what we write. It is also about sharing ideas together and coming and developing new ideas and demands for policymakers. Then we also answer to specific requests. So it might sound a little bit vague, but it is a way to say that we are not just on autopilot with the members. We also want the members to reach out to us if they are willing to do something about a specific policy, if they want to organize a specific event in Brussels where they would like us to support their initiative. We are very open to this, and we do this quite often. Now, moving on to collaboration and knowledge exchange. Why do we need that? It is pretty obvious. We need this to help develop a shared vision of what sustainable mountain development looks like. It is connected to advocacy, but it is also connected to the continent as a whole. We all realize that we need a differentiated approach for mountains, but we also need to converge on a vision. Okay, and this is not the easiest part of the job. So it is both to create this shared vision, but it is also to inspire region and encourage the exchange between mountain areas. So it is away from Brussels and more facilitating the exchanges between territories. So we also do it in a not very original way, but quite powerful ways. The first way we have is that we have developed a database of good practices for development in mountains, which you can find on our website. We try to expand it with a lot of good practices from all around the continent on a number of areas relevant to mountains, from agriculture to climate. We very much welcome suggestions from our members to improve this database with more ideas and experiences. Then the more traditional ways that we do this knowledge sharing is again through our newsletter, which is not only a compilation of political development, but it is also news about the members themselves. So if you're doing something very interesting that you would like to share with the rest of the network, we can write together a nice piece of article that we will include in our newsletter or even on our website. I also mentioned sharing knowledge through policy brief and specific documents and reports for our members. And also, very, very importantly, we organize workshops and large conventions together. And this is where I want to stop for a moment, because the European Mountain Conventions is something that is a highlight of the life of our network. It is a major conference for mountain that is taking place every 2 years. And every 2 years, we work with one or sometimes two of our members to co-organize it together on a specific theme. So next year, for example, the topic is pastoralism and extensive livestock, and how we connect this activity with territorial development. Obviously, we do it because it will be the International Year of Mountains, of Pastoralism, sorry. But we had very different topic over the years, and the last one in Norway was in Lillehammer in 2010, and the topic there was innovation. So as you can see, we work very closely with our members to define what should be the scope of these events, and we organize it together. To sum up again on collaboration, how do we work with our members? On our side, we inform the members on any new good practices or new development or studies or reports that could be relevant for mountains. We also share and relay good practices from our members. So that's also an invitation for you to never hesitate to share with us what you want to share with the rest of the network. And we support initiative from the members. For example, we are regularly asked and invited to take part in events organized by some of our members, or to reinforce their message at a national level by going to a national event that they want to organize about mountains. And we are happy to facilitate, and we are happy to participate. And finally, we co-organize with our members the European Mountain Conventions. Moving on to the less strategic pillars, but nonetheless important for the network, the development of projects together. Why do we do it? Well, as I said, we need new knowledge, we need data to support our two other pillars of action, the advocacy and the knowledge sharing. It is also a way, to be fully transparent, to encourage cooperation between mountain areas and between our members. By being collaborative projects, we have a concrete material on which we can work on together. And we do that in three ways, mostly by facilitating matchmaking between our members who want to develop projects together. We also take part in projects directly, and obviously we support we monitor the opportunities of funding that members would like to benefit from. This is just a slide to give you an overview of the ongoing projects in which we, as a secretariat, we are involved as a partner. They cover a very broad range of topics, from fire management and resilient landscape to enhancing social innovation in rural areas, which is a project we currently have with Norwegian members, including from the county. But we also have dedicated projects on climate change. So it really reflects our diverse focus. To continue on this, just to give you some examples of opportunities of funding that we are currently looking into and that we have already shared with our members. We are looking into potential projects on how to avoid maladaptation for climate change, on how to boost competitiveness in rural areas, how to be more resilient to shocks, and how to enhance mobility in rural areas. These are just some examples, but they show the diversity of topics that we have to work on, and also the diversity of interest from our network. So again, here, if you have an idea or if you see an opportunity of funding for a European level project, you would like to reach out to some of our members, we are very open and happy to facilitate this contact and to also support the writing if needed. So to sum up how we work with our members for collaborative projects, we inform on opportunities, we facilitate matchmaking, we help the project development itself by being a partner or advising on what to write in the proposal to increase the chances to win. And we also relay, and we're happy to share outcomes from projects in which we are not involved, but maybe you might be involved in one and you want to share the results. We do that very happily. And to conclude with the last part on research and studies, why do we need to do additional work? We have enough already, as I presented before, but sometimes we do, because sometimes we just don't have the data, and we don't have a project funded by the European Union to help us get the data. So we can also decide together with our members to invest time and energy in doing a study or a report on a specific theme. We do that collectively, usually with a decision from our board, and in collaboration with the network of European mountain researchers, which is called NIMOR, in case you're not familiar. And these are 4 representative examples of such work that we have done. The most recent was, in fact, a tender from the French Agency for Cohesion in Territories to work on climate change and explore how different European countries are dealing with transition in ski tourism. But we also had a very interesting and powerful study and survey about what it means to be a young person in a mountain area, where we had feedback from all over Europe on how they view their challenges, but also how they view sustainable development in mountains. Another interesting work we have is very specific and probably not very relevant for Norway, but a technical work on the European Union quality term mountain product, which is a regulation that defines how you can use the word mountain product on food products. And we have done a world study to see how the different European member states are implementing it. And a bit before that, in 2017, we had a study and a report on innovation and circular economy in mountain forest supply chain. So very specific. At the time, we had an intern who was doing a PhD on this, so we took advantage to create new knowledge. To sum up again, how do we work with members on this particular area? Well, it's very flexible. It is not our routine work. So when we see an opportunity and a need to create new knowledge, without having a European project to work on that, we decide collectively within our board on what we should be doing, and then we work with our members to collect data and also analyze the data. And we can also support members who themselves are producing a publication or a report. We can contribute with some data or with some sections. We are always open to do that. As I said, it is not our main activity, but it is important to be open to this as well. And with this, I would like to thank you for your attention. There is much more we can do. We are available to hear your thoughts and your ideas, and happy to implement what we can implement with our small team of 5. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Guillaume. Just before we close, a small question, or not, maybe not small, but still, could you elaborate what is, in your opinion, or Euromontana's opinion, what are the most important issues that are, let's say, at stake at the moment for the work for the mountain areas towards the European Union, and how do you sort of deal with that?
So as I said, we have a few strategic objectives for the next few years that I've mentioned before, and they are very much connected to the current context. So the objectives that we have to work on is the common agriculture policy, because it is being reformed for the next programming period of the EU, but also the cohesion policy, which is a second big piece of legislation relevant to mountains, and pastoralism, because this is not only part of the agriculture policy, but it is also part of the territorial discussion. It is important for us that livestock farming and pastoralism is not just an agriculture discussion, but a broader development discussion. So for us, these are the three main priorities. And there are the priorities now because the political agenda of the European level is focusing on that now. And if we miss the opportunity now, then we have to live with the consequence for 7 years. So currently we are very much focused on positioning ourselves for the new budget of the European Union, the so-called multi-annual financial framework. This is really what is at stake for mountains. For example, we see that in the current proposal of the EU, there is very little role for regions, and there is no protection of how the funds are going to be spent in rural areas and even less in mountain areas. So this is where we focus our energy now. But we also have to look at mega trends, and the mega trends are twofold: climate change and demographic change. These are the two big issue that we have to work on, and we are very happy that we have 2 European funded projects to be able to put resources into that. And so these are the thematically biggest issue for mountains in our views, and politically the ones that I've mentioned before.
Thank you very much. Thank you again, and we are very happy to distribute this information internally, and hopefully we can be even more active partner for the areas that you are working in Euromontana. So thank you very much, Guillaume, for taking part, and have a nice day forward.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the invitation.